it's Wednesday. Let's chat. Hi, I'm Kanan Chandran, the publisher of stormasia.com, and this is our regular series of WED WEB Chats. Well, it's been a couple of interesting years, I would think, for us to try and figure out how we're going to journey forth as we work our way out of a pandemic, but into a whole storm of other issues. I think there was optimism coming into 2022, but reality sunk in kind of quickly. Costs are going up, inflation, there's a war breaking up, the war broke out, and then we had to deal with that. A lot of social political issues to contend with as well, and the specter of inflation. So it's a mixed bag of challenges. Some may say, well, there is some optimism in some of that, but maybe not a lot. But it's been a minefield. It is a minefield. And while we are coming to a new year, 2023, and you can't say it is going to be a reset by any stretch of the imagination. It's all the issues that we've been facing will come along with us, and we will still have to deal with it, and we'll still have to figure out how we can deal with it. So how do we plan for a year that is so uncertain? Today's panelists will shed some light on that, I'm sure. And we've got Marlene Ditzig, who has just launched the ISH, a consultancy focused on helping women build their professional brand. She's just recently returned. We've got Nicole Seah, is the Youth Wing President of the Workers' Party and sits on its Central Executive Committee. Mike Hagbeck is the CEO of StorHub, a regional self-storage business based in Singapore. He's been on our discussions before, and we look forward to hearing his views. And Martin Bem is the founding managing director of the Ponte Group, a regional F&B player in the region, including brands like Level 33 and the Paulana for Asia Pacific. Martin was here earlier, but we've had some issues with Zoom and we had to restart this whole session. Let's look at where we're going with 2023. And I thought it would be great to just start off with some of the things that we have learned from 2022 and which we think we will be able to bring into 2023. Let's start with you, Nicole. What sort of things would you see yourself bringing forth into next year?
Yeah, so I think, I prepared a whole bunch of talking points about, youth issues and all. I do feel that a lot of these issues will continue to prevail into 2023. So a couple of things that you spoke about earlier as well, right? So I think we came into 2022 knowing that we were at the tail end of COVID and there was a little bit of optimism there. But I think obviously with the war in Ukraine and, the hike in interest rates, and I think generally across the board, the supply chain disruptions and, the announcements that GST would be increased progressively. All of that has really led to a perfect storm, so to speak, a perfect storm of the cost of living really being one of the highest that we've ever seen in recent history. I think the last time we had a similar rate of inflation was during the 2008 Lehman Brothers crash. And even then, I think the perception on the ground is that people do still feel that the cost of living is a lot higher, and it's higher than it's ever been. So how does this affect the youth? I mean, usually when we think of the youth, we talk about more lofty sort of policies such as, things like human rights or, things that are a bit broader and a bit more arbitrary. But I think increasingly the youth do feel the crunch of the bread and butter concerns and pressures. So if you think about the youth and you're looking at the group of people who are below 40 years old, a lot of them are entry-level staff, right? They're just starting their careers. Not all of them will be able to be hired by big tech companies or, enjoy inflated salaries. So ultimately, if they're entry-level staff and, they're trying to build their families, they're trying to build a home, they're trying to get married, what we do observe is that their salaries might not be able to keep up with inflation, and they might find it difficult to manage expenses on a daily basis. And I just read an article this morning that credit companies are seeing more loans for daily expenses and not for big ticket items. So that was a bit of a red flag to me. And it seems that, there is difficulty for people to live within their means and continue their current way of life, even if it's not by any means extravagant. That kind of also leads us to employment, right? When we're talking about employment, not just for this year, but next as well. You've seen that there were the Meta layoffs. And obviously, when we talk about Meta layoffs, Meta is such a huge company that these layoffs don't just happen in silo, but it's an indication of the wider economy and, people spending less in general, advertisers having, much lower confidence to, go ahead and, push their products out aggressively. So how does that then bode for, other industries and whether there's going to be a trickle-down effect? So what I'm saying is that the Meta layoffs don't just affect Meta employees or Meta ex-employees, but, they will also affect the other industries. And, now you have this talent pool of extremely credentialed and highly qualified people who are out there in the market and they're looking for jobs. So that's also going to be increased competition with a lot of the young workforce. So I think, what we'll do as a political party, we'll continue to monitor that situation. We are certain that there are other tax generation avenues that are available that do not require a raising of consumer taxes progressively over 2 years. And, that will result in a compounding increase in cost that goes beyond that 1 to 2% on paper. So we've also already spoken about slowing the rate of reserves growth as well to further support consumers and businesses in the coming year. And I do want to highlight that, we are for public spending, but there also needs to be the right timing there. So with external circumstances prevailing, we do still feel that it's a bad time to raise GST at this point in time.
Obviously, a few lessons for us in the F&B and hospitality industry. It was a roller coaster with more downs than ups, unfortunately, over the last 2 years. But once was definitely that I think we are more resilient and stress resistant than we would have imagined before. A very crucial point for us is that people are still in the forefront of everything. So one of the main goals for us was to keep all staffing. So we didn't let go of anybody throughout the 2 years, which was tough. Everybody had to tighten the belt a little bit, but we made it through. And this pays off now. We feel the loyalty of our staff even higher than before. We already have a very high retention rate for our industry, but now it's even better than before. And we see the importance of people also in the guest reactions now. That's maybe an interesting fact that we see more guests looking for a direct dialogue with us, meaning not necessarily just booking a table or reservation on an online platform, but calling the restaurant, WhatsApping the restaurant to want to have a personal interaction, a personal dialogue. And I think that we are social beings, and giving tech that blinded us a little bit, but at the end, when we have the opportunity to have a social interaction from human to human, we are grasping at this now even more than before.
I mean, I'm fortunate enough to be able to travel a bit around the region, and over this year, what it seems or has seemed to me is people are kind of almost not desperate, but very keen to go back to the pre-COVID. They want to travel, have holidays, go here, go there. And in terms of face-to-face meetings, as Martin was referring to, we have Zoom and Teams and whatever, but the face-to-face meetings, now that they're available, people want that I guess the personal touch or the human contact is still there. It hasn't changed. And Cullen and I over the years have had conversations about how far automation is going to replace humanity almost. And I feel quite optimistic it's not going to. I think people still want to deal with people a lot more, as much and maybe even more, because they've seen what it's like having a couple of years where you couldn't meet people. So, maybe, there are going to be some things happening, like, China and opening up to COVID could disrupt that, because I suspect they might have to slow down, but I'm not an expert on it. But overall, I would say, in terms of social, I think we are recovering very well from COVID. So the word resilience was used. So, hopefully humanity is a resilient species, but certainly the people that we deal with in the Asia Pacific are bouncing back, I think, pretty quick.
I am so sorry. The Zoom issues persist. It's telling me I cannot start my video camera. It just went off on me. But I'm very much still here, and I'll try and join over video shortly.
You'll have to imagine what you look like.
I know, I did my hair and everything. But I guess that's very much like COVID, all dressed up and nowhere to go. So, to answer your question, Kanan, I started the Ish very much because of the lessons I had learned from my 6 years in the US. One, I think as a consultancy and coaching platform focused on helping women elevate their professional brand. What we found over COVID was on an individual level, right? During high periods of change and uncertainty, coaching increases in demand because people are looking for support through those periods of volatility. But more specifically, I think as women, we have a unique challenge where we may not feel as able to talk about, our accomplishments, sort of bragging rights, as you will, or how do we create visibility within organizations. There's tons of scientific studies around that prove this. I will not go into them. But when I thought about that, right, and when I thought about moving into leadership teams over the last 6 years, from food and hospitality to market research to on-demand talent, what I found was that I was very often either the only woman at the table or the only person at the table that was not fully white. And that had very interesting challenges that I had to then learn to navigate. So, when I think about what the challenges are for 2023, I think that will persist. To Nicole's point, we're going to see a talent market of increased competition that's felt at an individual level. And so the ability to build a compelling and clear professional brand is even more important. I think on a corporate level, I felt this as a leader, the strain of being able to tell my team, I care about you, right? The personal and professional was blended. Any leader felt the pressures of how do I lead authentically? How do I exemplify to my team I care about them without in-office catered lunches or foosball tables and very cool office settings, right? And, that is exactly why coaching came to be. How do you create authentic teams and safe, diverse, equitable spaces for conversation? And you see corporations take this on as sort of a necessity over the span of 2022. And I think in 2023, it will definitely still be thought of as, this is how I show I care about my people. This is how I enable coaching conversations through my leadership.
Okay, great.
If I can jump in quickly, because
please.
I'm very interested to hear about this talent market, because everybody I know is not finding any. So not only in my industry, obviously, which is historically famous for having a shortage of manpower, but even for corporate jobs, even in our office jobs, it's very difficult to get even interviews going. And I think we just have our 12th anniversary for Level 33, the restaurant, and we have over 15% of our workforce is with me for more than 10 years, which I think for an F&B industry is long. So we must do something right in staff retention, but we are notoriously short of staff by about 15%, understaffed. And I'm also a member of the Entrepreneurs Organization of entrepreneurs from every walks of life and every industry. And everybody's suffering a talent crunch. So I was wondering, where are these talents, to be honest?
Yeah, Martin, it's so interesting that you raised that. I think that, I've noticed that myself. I think there are two factors that we might be looking at. The first is when we look at qualified professionals, right? There's this whole wave called the Great Resignation. I'm sure everyone's familiar with that. They've all felt burnt out to some extent during COVID. And as a result of that, they want to step back, they want to pursue their own interests, or even become an entrepreneur themselves rather than working for someone. But I think those are people who are also in the position to make choices like that, right? And I think on the other hand, you do see that there is a slight bit of structural unemployment in the market where maybe we might want to hire people. And I'm also speaking as a hiring manager myself. We want to hire people, but sometimes the standard or, the drive or even that kind of qualification or education to do so is simply not there. And when I talk about the qualification, it's not just what you see on paper, but it's also the soft skills, right? Like how they respond to people, their work ethic, all these things. And you can't really train that to some extent. So that's a bit of a gap that we've noticed.
With all these issues that you've raised, right, about talent and whatnot, I think we know they are there. These are problems that we're all trying to tackle, but what can we do about it? How can we work towards improving the situation It could be a wish list on your part, or it could be something that is quite practical that you could apply. But what can we do to get over this hurdle and find the talent and get the issues resolved?
Our workforce, we have the bulk of it are in our stores, so customer facing. Historically, we never had much trouble, but over the last 12 months, salary expectations have jumped up. So we had to increase our pay for our entry-level staff by about 20% over the last 12 months. Just because people are saying effectively, well, I can't afford to live on what was the previous amount. So that's fine. I mean, we take the feedback and we have been able to, roll out increases to the new staff, and that then flows through to the existing staff. So there is this pressure, but it's fine. We can manage that. But in terms of, I guess, the professional, like accountants or acquisitions or those guys, again, we haven't had an issue. We're not a big employer. We only have about 300 people, but what we do is we kind of think about every position and the people that we want for that position. In a sense, we kind of target where those people might be. So for example, acquisitions, our head of acquisitions became an advisor to one of the business schools. And so he was able to, in a sense, get to know these guys and sell us as a company to new graduates. So we're able, in a sense, to push our way into the head of the queue a little bit. So reaching out more. So I think maybe in the old days, in the industries and different companies, you put up a job and people would come and apply. That's great. But I think now, especially in Singapore, where it seems that there's more demand for workers than supply, in a sense, we have to work a little bit harder to sell ourselves to people and to reach out more. So in a sense, it's working okay for us right now, that approach.
Okay, so more visibility, shouting out a bit more, right? Martin and Mike, you've got your business is in the region, right? You've got operations in other countries as well. Is the situation in Singapore kind of unique to Singapore, or is it replicated in all the other markets that you're in? Or are there certain issues that are happening here which prevent us from doing things a lot better than it could be?
I think Singapore was the most stable place to do business over the last 2 years, given the unexpected curveballs we were thrown at all the time. I think here we got great subsidies from the government that helped us in the F&B industry to survive at the end of the day. And they arrived where they were needed immediately and in a short term, right? And I think that is a unique situation throughout Southeast Asia, at least, right?
Okay, so
even compared to Europe, not only the region.
I'd say Tokyo and Seoul are big cities, wealthy cities. How we appeal to staff there is an interest in working with a foreign company. So we kind of say, okay, we're a good employer. We understand Korea, we understand Japan. Come and work with us for the experience. So from that perspective, again, we haven't had challenges with staff. Hong Kong has been a bit tougher. Some of the type of people we would like to employ have left Hong Kong because of, I guess, purely Hong Kong political reasons. In terms of managing how the economy bounces back and managing the workforce, I would say Singapore's done pretty well. It's a pretty resilient place. I think maybe it went down fast, but it came back fast as well. So, thinking about different markets and where we want to have our head office, Singapore clearly is the best market to have a head office, certainly for our business in Asia.
Doesn't the cost of operating in Singapore serve as sort of a challenging situation because it's only going to go up next year?
Yeah, I mean, that is a challenge. I mean, our head office is up on the roof of one of our storage properties, so we kind of manage our office costs that way. But we also have the view and the experience and the observation. I'll be very careful how I express this, but a strong employee is worth 3 or 4 weaker employees. So if we hire one strong employee in Singapore, they can do the job of 3 or 4 people elsewhere who don't have the skills or the motivation or just the technical know-how that we need. So in that sense, having fewer, more expensive resources still pays off for us by being based in Singapore.
Okay. Marlene, you've just returned. What was the reason for coming back? I thought, you were happily settled in the US.
Lots of reasons. I think, COVID probably had this effect for a lot of people, but it was very humanizing. So for me, I think it hit a stage of, I wanted to be back closer with my family, and with my mom, because I am Singaporean. So that was definitely probably the biggest motivator. The second side of that, I think came very much in line with feeling like I had learned a lot in my 6 years in the US and leading different teams and being in different organizations there. And I had always had the mindset of I wanted to come back to Singapore and give back, bring what I had learned, enrich it. So learn more. That's going to be a key part of 2023, and being back in Singapore for me is relearning and reintegrating into Singapore, but also giving back to the community that I originally came from, using what I've learned and being able to help empower and enable other people with it.
What's the reception been to starting up the ish? What's with the name? Can you just quickly explain to us, or to me, if the others already know what I mean, the
absolutely.
ish?
It is intentionally enigmatic. So the ish for millennials, hopefully they'll kind of get it. It's a tongue-in-cheek reference to the 2000s of saying be the ish, like be the shit, in a good way. And so it was a play on that, but more specifically, it's really an idea of the ish is a suffix, right? It takes on the qualities of whatever it is attached to, the noun of it. And that's kind of how I wanted to think about a consultancy. It is about the individual, understanding that each person has their own journey, intended destination, versions of success. And we're really a platform of not changing the individual, but helping the individual get to their desired destination.
Okay, so are you going to be appealing to the millennial generation then with your consultancy?
I think so. So far, yes, that's where I'm starting. I think generally that's where coaching saw the biggest boom as well over COVID. And into now, the level of awareness, again, amongst millennials is the highest in that demographic. But also, it's what I know. I am a millennial woman, right? And I speak from that purview and want to help other women in that sort of vein as well. That said, one of the things I am thinking about for 2023 is scale and flexibility and accessibility. So don't be shocked if you hear about us broadening that focus with other coaches in different specializations.
Right, so it's about building networks at the end of the day, right? Nicole, with your interaction on the ground, you meet all kinds of people, I'm sure not just the youth. Do you get a sense that, what Marlene was just talking about, her sort of the ish is very millennial and they can relate to it? The older generation, the ish, what? Yeah. So do we have that sort of situation where there is still a lack of understanding across generations? And Mike and Martin, if you'd like to jump in as well, could that be a problem in terms of trying to get more of the right people to join your organizations?
I think that this generational difference is not something that is specific to millennials and Gen Z. I think it's something that will prevail through the times, right? I mean, when I was starting out in my career, I was a millennial and I had to deal with, older Gen X employees who told me that I was doing things the wrong way. And I think the good thing that came out of COVID was, they always say, what was the biggest driver of digital transformation in each of your companies? And everyone always says COVID. I think that really forced people to change the way they think and operate and really shift towards a very digitally centric sort of perspective. So I think a lot of the things that people would have felt was not so right about the younger generation, things like work from home, taking Zoom calls, and doing a lot of these face-to-face sort of sessions on Zoom and digitalizing everything essentially. I think that's become more acceptable because of COVID. So I would say that that's probably one good outcome that came from the whole pandemic. And I think it's level the playing field. Yeah.
I wish we could keep up with the automation and digitalization that we came up with, because what I see, as a simple example, I have a beer importing and distribution business. And finally, I had the excuse with COVID to say, okay, I don't want to get checks anymore because my salesperson doesn't drop by just to collect a check. You have to do online banking. And that worked until March this year. And then as soon as it opened up, the customers again called, can you collect the check? So they wanted to go back to check collection. So it's the old habits die very slowly. But I think also, I'm a company, so especially for the restaurant industry, we try to implement as much tech as we can. But some of it, and this is, I think, led also to the mentioned layoffs in the tech industry, because I think it was overblown and it was a tech bubble in my point of view. Just think about the delivery services. So over the last 2 years, we read a lot about delivery and it's the future of F&B and so on. And first of all, it's a system where nobody makes money at the end of the day. So even the operators of the food delivery services, if you look at their P&L and the investor relations, none of them has a positive EBITDA. So they are buying market share. Their restaurants lose money because they pay a 30% fee to the delivery operators. So how should that be sustainable in the long term? So some of this, we were a little bit blinded by the future of tech in certain aspects, I think, that are not sustainable in the long run. And I think that led to the high salaries of certain younger employees and the salary expectations. And I mean, there were a lot of layoffs, I think, from Amazon, Meta, and all of them. But compared to what they hired over the last 2 years, it's a tiny percentage.
You're talking about the shiny bits of tech, right? The delivery service. It's more of a tech play, I feel. It's just that it's been latched on to the food delivery. They're trying to build something, as you say, trying to build market share. But will the sheen rub off down the line? How much of a future do you see in these sort of companies? You're talking about Meta, Nicole, you're talking about Meta laying off and Amazon laying off and stuff like that. Do you think that that's more prevalent in the new industries rather than the old established ones?
No, I think it brings the mindset a little bit back to the old school economics, that at the end of the day, somebody has to pay the bills, and just growth in market share and year-on-year growth is not the KPI that can measure everything.
Nicole, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with Martin on this. I think, that's the beauty of the free market as well, right? Things will eventually start to level themselves out. I think when we're talking about, for example, maybe a small group of younger workers or staff who might feel entitled to a higher salary just because they're younger or faster, I think these things have a tendency to level out. And it's the mistake that people make is that we always think that salary is always an upward trajectory, that you're always going to be earning a higher salary with every move that you make. But definitely there's going to come a point where your skill sets hit a ceiling or your age hits a ceiling, and that starts to plateau or even go down. So I think perhaps that's why we need to be prevalent to the free market forces in order to really understand that reality. I think the entitlement is definitely dangerous and something that we should avoid at all costs.
Is that too much talk of comfort zones? I mean, the shelter, the guaranteed income, all those sort of things. Are we preparing ourselves for an eventual downfall because we are then not resilient, not ready, not able to tackle the headwinds that will hit us when all these things fall apart? Are we too much of living too much in a cocoon, you think?
I think it really depends. Increasingly, with the internet, with social media, there's also a sensing that we are starting to become a lot closer and to the other countries, and we're starting to have a better understanding of how hungry people in other countries are. So for example, if you look at a younger person in China, or let's not even talk about China, let's move closer to home, right? Vietnam, Myanmar, these people are building empires from scratch, you know, and here we are in this very safe and comfortable sort of place. And I think the onus is really on the individual at the end of the day to also try and push themselves forward and understand that we're not just competing against other Singaporeans, but we're also competing on a global stage. But at the same time, I will also say that, you know, as much as it's individual effort, we also need kindness and compassion from our leaders to make sure that the tools and the infrastructure are put in place to get there. So, you know, levels such as education or even social assistance, you know, all these things need to be put in place to make sure that we remove as much hindrances as possible to cultivate that sort of global citizen mindset.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to say, if anybody in the audience has a question, and if Zoom is working properly, please feel free to either put a question in the Q&A box or the chat box. Yeah. Nicole, you were talking about the kindness of the leaders. Do you feel that there is enough appreciation and understanding of what's on the ground for the right things to be done next year and beyond?
I think to some extent there is. The Workers' Party, we position ourselves as an alternative party, and of course, you know, we're the opposition party in Parliament. But at the same time, I don't think it's wise for us, especially when we're entering a recession or uncertain times, to be, you know, to just attack or, you know, oppose like policies for the sake of it. I think we evaluate each policy on its own merits, and if we feel that it's in national interest, we are happy to support. And that's why I think for most parts, you know, the Workers' Party has been very supportive of bills passed in government, such as the COVID reliefs that were doled out to businesses during that period. You know, we're not just going to like push back and say that, no, we're not going to do that just for the sake of it. I think we always evaluate what is best for people. But I think in the same vein, we also want to see what more could be done. I think increasingly, we do recognize that there is an increasing inequality. People who are from the middle class or the lower middle class, they find it difficult to break out of that perspective. And I think part of that is also due to the segregation that you see in the education system. Obviously, that's a bit of an informal segregation that's built up over the years, where you have people from a more well-off district going to the same school. But I think then that kind of really puts into question that notion that every single school in Singapore is a good school. It is all these very subtle differences, not just in class, but socio-economic background and the social capital that we have that ultimately will snowball and lead into whether someone is comfortable holding their own in a boardroom in a multinational corporation, you know, versus someone who hasn't really had that exposure or confidence. So I think there's definitely more that we can do. And I think that's why Marlene's, you know, startup is also valuable, and it adds to the Singapore ecosystem, because you're not just supporting women, but you're also supporting, you know, building the building of more qualified talent in the workforce.
Mike, in your case, you've got a regional play. How do you see the next year shaping up for you in the various markets, Singapore versus the other markets? Do you see growth continuing at the same pace, or do you see different sort of trajectories?
Again, differences. I think one big factor is high interest rates. In Korea, for example, a year ago, we were borrowing at 2.5%, now borrowing at 7.5%. And your average Korean consumer borrows a lot of money so they can live in Gangnam, for example, or prestigious residence. So I think in Korea, because they're so highly leveraged, we are going to see a slowdown to kind of consumer side. Japan, interest rates have gone up, or about to go up a bit, but they're still pretty low. So I think Japan will just continue on. China, like I said, with COVID policies that they have now, I don't feel confident about making any predictions about China. Hong Kong's a bit similar to Singapore because it's small and resilient. It's bouncing back, I think, quite well. Southeast Asia seems to be doing quite well as well. So on balance, I'd say probably not a bad year. Next year, I don't see like recession or depression. But it's not going to be a strong year, and interest rates are kind of heavy burden on a lot of economies there.
Okay.
So I mean, I tend to see the sunny side of the street normally, but I do feel COVID was probably the worst that could happen to it. I'm sure I can think of other examples, but COVID was pretty bad. So now that we're more or less through that, I would say, yeah, we can be relatively optimistic.
Martin, how about yourself?
I mean, I think that we are in a very good position here in Southeast Asia and Singapore above all. I would see a recession probably happening in the US and Europe potentially. China I think, will be struggling next year. But Singapore, I think, will benefit and is already benefiting, especially of the political situation in Hong Kong. So I think we will have a lot of, especially in the financial industry, a nice steady growth in Singapore as well, which always helps the overall consumption and doesn't help the real estate prices, unfortunately. But it helps on the consumption side, I think, especially in us in the F&B and hospitality industry. I think we will be in a good shape because Singapore is in a good position for the regionally. But I see for the biggest issue for us is the workforce, that we don't find enough people to really service the demand that we actually have at the moment, which is doubly painful after the last 2 years. To have now business that sometimes you cannot pick up because you simply don't have the human resources to fulfill the demand.
We've got a question from David for Nicole, but I'd like to open it up also to the other panelists in their respective industries. It's about how to attract young talent and garner greater youth involvement. Nicole, for you, it will be, of course, the Workers' Party, but for the others. And I would also like to open it up to not just the younger, but also you've got a large pool of older people who are still able to contribute. How can we involve them in the process as well? But let's start with you, Nicole.
Yeah, that's a great question, David. Thanks for asking. And I think that's one of the questions that also keep me awake at night. Definitely with politics, I think not just in Singapore, but in other countries, right? It can become quite a polarizing exercise and, people start slinging mud from both sides of the house. But I think with regards to how to attract youth, number one, I think we need to normalize political involvement in Singapore to some extent. Historically, that hasn't always been the case. And I think we've only started to see a bit more openness and, opposition politics gaining a fair bit of mainstream acceptance in the last 10 years or so. So that's something that we'll continue to build upon. But I think internally, it's also about creating an organizational culture that responds to the needs of the youth and make them feel that they're being accepted and heard rather than to, just be, told to like sit down and keep quiet. So that's a bit of an Asian cultural mindset that we're trying to shift as well. Definitely, we need to give younger people the autonomy or feel like they have the autonomy to push for initiatives on their part. So I'm mindful of time, so I'm not going to go too much into that. I'll let the other panelists provide their response as well.
I would just quickly build on that. I think that should be the default setting, to have also younger people participate and giving their ideas and initiatives to the company. But what we try to do on top of it is we try to provide a higher purpose of the job they're doing. So what we do, for instance, as an example, we have now appointed a sustainability officer for the whole group. So we look not only to serve great meals, make nice turnover, and the traditional career and business parameters, but we try to really do all of that with the purpose of being a sustainable business, also ecologically, socially. We have a lot of charities that we support, but also internally we try to be very careful with the resources that we use, from electricity, and to produce as close to Singapore as possible for everything. And I think that gives them a different perspective to the traditional career perspective and just looking at salary and the traditional monetary package.
Yeah, I think, Martin, you raise a great point, as well as Nicole. I think one of the things that a lot of the youth are looking for, especially my generation and below it, is that we are looking to be able to bring our whole selves to work. So organizations that can create a culture of inclusivity and that idea of like career development, you are enabling your employees to be your best versions of social selling. And that I think it appeals especially to the younger generation of saying like, oh, someone told me this was a great organization. So you go by testimonials. It's one of the most effective ways that I've seen other organizations then be able to overcome some of the talent challenges and shortages that they've seen as well.
There's parts where we can give younger people some career progression. So it tend to be like finance and acquisitions, but there's other parts where it's more of a, I shouldn't say routine, but more of a steady state. And I think a young person coming into a steady state job is going to get bored pretty soon. So in that, for that part of our business, we tend to be biased towards older people. So, you know, they are, I guess they've done their career stuff before. Now they want like stable job, or they got kids. They want to be, you know, close to school, have time off with the kids, and have a crack team of old people sitting over there and looking after our facilities. And they tend not to zigzag, they just go straight to where they need to be. So they're actually quite efficient, because they just know if this has happened, then let's go there and fix it. So again, I guess my earlier point, I think you can't have just one philosophy for the whole company. You need to look at the different parts and work out, okay, well, this is the type of person we need here, there, and everywhere. So a little bit of flexibility around the thought process does work well. Okay, great. It's been a great chat. I think before we wrap up, could I just ask each of you to chime in on the one key lesson that you will take with you into 2023? Right, so one key strategic lesson that may help the viewers as well. Nicole, can we start with you?
Okay, I think from a personal level, you know, it's year end, we're doing lots of reflections all across the board. One mantra that I will be taking into 2023 will be to do less to achieve more. So I think it's really a matter of scaling down, focusing on what's important, and you know, time management and discipline, you know, given that we only have 24 hours in a day. But if we want to achieve our goals, then, you know, we just need to be very focused in that sense, and yeah, to do less, but to do those lesser things well. Okay, be more efficient with everything, right? Okay. Mike, how about yourself?
For me, I guess the reflection, or where I'm thinking is that the balance between automation and people. You know, automation does make your business more efficient, but great sales, great customer service can't be automated in my mind. So in a sense, like, how do we use automation to run our business more efficiently as we scale up? But at the same time, how are we getting, you know, the right people, good people to come and join with us? So I think we're getting there, but I guess we'll just keep working on that. Okay. Martin?
Now, for me, it would be to stay aware to your meta values and don't take anything for granted, because there's always a curveball around the corner. And I think you need your compass of your meta values to then be able to tackle everything that comes your way.
Okay. Anticipation. Marlene, how about yourself?
Yeah, know your audience. So whether you are creating a new product line to solve the pain point, I think everyone's going to feel the pressures of having to do more with less next year, whether you're an organization or an individual. So being able to articulate how you are going to help someone do that, your key audience do that, is going to help you attract talent. It's going to help you be successful. It's going to differentiate you as an investment rather than a cost. So know your audience and create with them in mind. Okay, great. Well, 2023 brings with it a lot of uncertainty. And I think what we would need to do is be aware of that and try and anticipate what we can. But it'll be difficult, of course, but I think we also need to be flexible in that things can change, new things may come up. Stay open to new things that are being discussed, new areas that are coming up that could give you some insights into how you can manage what you are doing and working with now. It's a new year, but like I said right at the start, the old issues will come along with it and make themselves quite evident as the year shapes itself. But don't let that be a cloud that's hanging over your head.
look for the bright spots and try and find a way to make the most of those spots as well. From me and from everybody else, have a great year end. Enjoy the festivities, and hopefully next year will be a great start for everybody. From next year, we will have this web chat on the first Wednesday of each month because we're introducing the physical events again. And hope to have some of you at those sessions, or all of you at those sessions, and continue the dialogue physically as well as virtually. Have a great year ahead, everybody.